Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk on Access Humboldt, radio, television, and the internet. I'm with Dave Frank, and my name is Eric Kirk, and we are going to discuss the national news of the day or the week. We, come on and do this basically most weeks. A lot of news in terms of national politics. I think the big story that's made most of the headlines is West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, who is, miraculously gets elected in West Virginia, which is one of the reddest states in the union, but is trying the patience of the more progressive wings and even some of the centrists in that he seems to be the one blocking everything because, as you know, the Democrats need that all 50 votes in order to bring in Vice President Harris to break the tie. And if they don't have that and they don't have any Republicans, and usually they don't, then it doesn't go through. And he's pretty much been dictating what goes through, what not. He did vote for impeachment. He did vote for the earlier stimulus bill. But he is pushing. He really wants. He will not support the One Voting Right Act, the HR1. He says he would favor the one that's named after Lewis, but Mitch McConnell's saying he won't vote for that, and Manchin is saying he won't support even reforming at this point the filibuster. He certainly won't vote to set it aside. He'd said that maybe he was into, maybe reforming it so it wasn't quite so easy, but he doesn't seem to be talking that way. He met with civil rights leaders a couple days ago who wanted to kind of pressure him on the voters' rights. He said it was productive, but he's not moving. He may end up going down in history as the savior of the new Jim Crow if it continues this way. And he wants the infrastructure bill to be bipartisan. Sounds like bipartisan talks have broken down. They're trying to throw it together again. But looks like they're at an impasse on a lot of things. And Manchin is being the consummate. I don't even know if I want to call it centrist. He is at the center of attention more so than Sinema, who might have a harder time getting reelected than Manchin. So what the question is what's going to happen here? Are the Democrats pretty much, do they have to give up on their agenda? What is Manchin's game? Is he going to budge? Or if he's pressured enough, will he switch parties?
Yeah, so there's a lot in there. This is an interesting development, I would say. He published over the weekend in the Charleston Gazette-Mail that he's warning partisan voting legislation will destroy the already weakening binds of our democracy. Despite the fact that many in his party view passing these pieces of legislation like SB1, the voting reform bill, view it as a necessary response to what we're seeing in some of these Republican-led legislatures around the country. That they're introducing laws that are going to limit ballot access ultimately, and we could talk about that in more detail. But the For the People Act, addresses things like campaign finance reform and a bunch of other things that are important, to figure out a better way to protect voting rights and voter access, right? So the question is here it is. Democracy bill will establish federally mandated voting rules, require no excuse mail voting and in-person voting, and also limit partisan gerrymandering and create a public finance system. So there's a lot in those bills. And one of the ways to view this, I would say, is that there's a strong coalition of conservative vested interests in not having some of those reforms put in place. So however Manchin frames it, however he's explaining it to folks, I think he's under enormous pressure from both sides to either lock in the current establishment as is or actually have play the role of a visionary contributor to Democratic passing Democratic priorities. So one final point on just kind of like, you mentioned that. Sorry, I'll have to start again. Senator Jeff Markley, a Democrat from Oregon, who's the lead sponsor of, I think, SB1, said in a statement that I wish with all my heart that this bill weren't necessary. I'm dead set against doing nothing. As I've told all my colleagues many times, I'm open to any conversation about the provisions of this bill and will not give up on democracy. So there is this tiny window of hope, I would say, out there still, that they could put the bill on the floor, debate on the merits, and somehow come up with some tweaks here and there. But realistically, I would, if they're not going to pass the infrastructure bill, to me, that's, they're making, my judgment is that they're making grave error here about what the American people across the country, but in particular West Virginia, what the West Virginian folks are really behind, and we can unpack that a little bit more if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah, we can do that. I mean, the criticism of Manchin is, first of all, that he's not even abiding by the class issues that would characterize his politics. It's one thing that he's not supporting, the culture war, from a left perspective, or, environmentalism. That's not a very strong, issue in West Virginia. But the minimum wage, and that just sort of suggests that the influence is dark money, even if it's indirect. Not that he even expects to get it, but he doesn't want to be the target of it as much as he's going to be. But he doesn't want to be what's his name in Iowa, who gets hit with it every single time. But he doesn't. He bucks it. But he, so is he afraid of that? I don't know, or is he just, as some have suggested, a prima donna who likes the attention, right? So part of the problem is he says, I that's a partisan bill, I don't support SB1, but he isn't making any counter proposals. Right. He's not saying I can support this, I can't support that. He's saying I'll support the Lewis bill. But will he support overriding the filibuster to get it passed? Because Mitch McConnell's saying he doesn't want anything. Voting reform's fine. Leave it to the states to do what they want. And so I don't know where it leaves us. Biden is trying to be very cautious and not calling him an obstructionist, but Democrats are losing their patience. Ocasio-Cortez, she railed into him. As did a few other people who have basically, are attacking him from the left. But, most of the people in the center, most of the senators are just like trying to treat him with kid gloves. And I wonder how long that's going to last.
Yeah, so my take on that is you hit the nail on the head with the dark money comment. There are articles out there saying that he's heavily lobbied from both sides, to be fair, but he's being heavily lobbied by groups like Americans for Prosperity, which is one of the dark money network pools, Charles Koch out there. Yeah. And so that's not a secret. It's not a secret that he's very interested in running for governor in 2024. And so there's this, opportunity, I would say, that he may be misreading the tea leaves and he may be persuadable, but it seems, Joe Biden appointing his wife to one of those commissions that distributes aid to the Appalachian area, that's not enough to sway him. That's just a small token gesture of party solidarity, I would say. But this whole angle of what's the hyper-focused West Virginia, I'll call it local, but really state politics in West Virginia, there is a potential pressure point for him because I don't recall the exact numbers off the top of my head, but the sitting governor, he was a Democrat, got elected. He's the CEO of a coal company, and then he changed parties to become a Republican. So, and also, Senator Byrd back in the day was a Democrat, but of course that's when Democrats had different priorities. So there's a set of Republicans there. there's a set of Democratic voters there that he is going to rely on to become the governor. And so there's, how the numbers play out. He is definitely going. The pressure point would be if there's a credible threat of progressive challenge or voting strike, support strike, where if he knows he needs them to get his governor's seat, he might actually, his equation might change slightly in terms of how he is right now being the obstructionist that you referred to.
Okay, infrastructure. This is one of those bills that they were hoping would be bipartisan. A lot of discussion. As I said earlier, the discussions have fallen apart. Manchin's partner, colleague in West Virginia, was negotiating, but they just seem to be so far apart that Biden basically announced he was pulling out of those talks. They're going to try another bipartisan thing, but Romney has come in and he's basically backtracking the Republicans back to their positions in April. So it doesn't seem like there's a lot of hope for bipartisanship at this point. Manchin was, hoping that there would be, because infrastructure is something that it seems like an overwhelming number of Americans support, something that they understand, bridges, roads, and all of that. But there's a big disagreement as to what constitutes infrastructure, about whether or not we need to start restructuring the economy around a green and climate oriented economy. And Republicans just seem dead set against that. And they want to keep it under $1 trillion. Biden, of course, had proposed over $2 trillion, was willing to come down a bit. Biden seemed to be willing to give up the tax increases to pay for it. And even though Manchin said he would support some level, of tax increase, I think going from 21% that it is currently, instead of going to 28%, he would support it up to 25%, but still doesn't pan out to pay for it all. So, big discussions about what the infrastructure, what even constitutes infrastructure. Is there going to be a bipartisan bill? I think Democrats are hoping for it because they want, apparently, according to the parliamentarian, they only get one more swing at reconciliation. They would like to not spend it on that. I think what they're thinking is maybe they'll jam the tax increase through with the families bill or one of the other bills. And otherwise they're going to try to have to do it all in one. And that's going to be very difficult. So where are we with the bipartisan infrastructure bill?
Yeah, so we found out this week that, the Senate Republicans are not interested in passing a serious infrastructure investment, despite, like you said, the fact that it's broadly popular, clearly necessary. I mean, the Society of Engineering studies out there show, I think it's like 70% of all bridges in our country require some degree of, major investment in maintenance, and it's, across the board. And then if you expand the definition of infrastructure to more visionary, the current proposed bill, it's also, many of those elements are very, very broadly popular. So my thought was that, last week, my hunch rather, and my prediction, what informed that was that this is the most obvious issue possible for the GOP to indicate a commitment to some semblance of investment on the ground that would directly benefit people's lives. And I did say it wasn't a strong conviction, but again, if there's any common ground, this would be on the short list for sure. So it turns out that the current state of affairs is truly tragically partisan. I know basically everybody seems to agree with that. I try to boil it down to game theory, where I'm trying to predict what's in people's best interests. And I was thinking, well, maybe they would figure out it's in their best interest to pass something here for, 4th of July is coming up around the corner. Just to show, look, we are capable of leadership. But obstruction does seem to be the ultimate goal. I know people have reminded me that that's what Mitch McConnell said, that his goal is to not let the Biden administration pass anything. I think we need to take it on face value now. Path dependency is predictive here. I'd say finally, comment here: the Biden administration will be able to use the reconciliation bill for sure, implement massive stimulus, improve people's lives, improve economic conditions more broadly. They will get the benefit in 2022 from in every county across the country that's going to see some of this money. But the polarization is just too severe for that type of calculation at this point. Yeah.
And if it's anything like the stimulus bill of a decade ago, I think we've discussed this before. Republicans are going to go home and act like they brought this, all the spending to their thing. I mean, it was on an MSNBC story. They have no shame. They'll just absolutely obstruct it and then go in and try to take credit for it. And this time, apparently, Democrats Biden has already said, hey, don't be taking credit for that. You didn't vote for it. And apparently, they're going to be very aggressive about that this time around. But either way, it does. You do have that element that they want to sabotage the economy to be able to win in 2022. They seem to be overt about it. They don't even seem to be, concerned about how it looks at this point. I don't think it's going to happen. But maybe, like I said, the Democrats will get smart, pass what they can to show they're trying to be bipartisan, and then just put everything into a reconciliation bill. They got to, again, have Manchin and Sinema on board. But maybe at that point, I mean, Manchin is also getting burned by McConnell left and right here. He's trying to be bipartisan and say, well, how about this other bill, the voting rights bill, and McConnell's no voting reform whatsoever. We don't have racism in this country anymore. 1619 is not an important date in American history. That's the line they're taking, and that's where they're at. But again, infrastructure, does it include rural access to the internet? Does it include, for instance, Biden wants to establish a wind farm in the Gulf of Mexico and gradually replace the oil infrastructure down there with it, because it's apparently the perfect place for it. And other people are seeing the writing on the wall. The company, I'm forgetting the name of the company, but they officially canceled the Keystone, which makes all the lawsuits against Biden moot. There are questions as to whether or not he had the authority to undo that contract. But it doesn't matter. The company's giving up on it. I think they're seeing the writing on the wall, and if the private sector is willing to start thinking about rethinking this, the Republicans are a bit behind at this point, and a few Democrats with it. So anyway, Dave?
You mentioned reconciliation bill. You mentioned how to pay for it, taxation. And then finally, you're referencing Green New Deal. So if you kind of connect those dots, and I hate to sound like a broken record here today, but that there are these dark money pools have stacks of millionaires and billionaires lined up in support of Donald Trump and they stop the steal and these distractions at the cultural politics level for a reason, because increasing taxes is their anathema issue, and transitioning to Green New Deal implies directly that coal industry is going to and fossil fuel industry is going to be affected. So unless there's a broad-based commitment to kind of like stringing them along and being like, you guys are billionaires, you've been making all this money for all this time, there's going to be some way to wean you off of this largesse you've been able to accumulate over all this time. But you're going to have to start paying taxes. So like an ExxonMobil or like a BP, they have shareholders. They have some degree of public accountability in theory. Whereas private energy companies like the Koch brothers and what they got going on, that's a private company. And a lot of these pipeline companies are private companies. No one has to see their books, and they're not accountable to anybody. Right. So they're scorched earth. And last thing, taxes here. An alternative minimum tax for corporations global, that's really become front and center of about a 15% number. Granted, there's wiggle room built into the way it's been framed, but companies that are used to paying no taxes or minimal taxes, or by obfuscation, confusion, having a more taxes increase on companies and having their prime business model disrupted. That's a scorched earth mentality. No wonder they're trying to fight this so strongly.
All right. Let's be really clear before we move on to the next topic. West Virginia Manchin, the politics of coal. Coal is dying as an industry and has nothing to do with the environmental regulations, although that's a factor. But even without the regulations, it can't compete with natural gas right now. Natural gas is the big thing everybody's been pushing, not everybody, and it's just not coming back. And Trump burned them on that. He promised it would come back, did nothing to make it come back because it can't come back.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
All right. Well, let's go down south of the border. I'm sure she wasn't looking for this assignment, but Vice President Kamala Harris has been given a couple of real tough assignments. One of them is to fix the border situation. So she went on her first trip out of the country abroad to go to Guatemala and Mexico City, making speeches, trying to work out some type of joint task force, made an announcement about that, and tried to work out how we can get through corruption. If we start investing money in this, how are we going to make sure it gets to the right places and not taken up by kleptocracies as aid in the past has done. A lot of the weeds, discussion may or may not have been productive. We won't know. But unfortunately, she either went off script or had a very bad script and made two comments that seem to be getting her into trouble and have given right-wingers a basis to attack her. One was when she was in Guatemala, she said, Don't come. We're not going to let you in. Don't come to the border. And that really upset a lot of immigration rights activists who are saying that's the wrong message. It's playing into xenophobia. Nobody's going to listen to it anyway, because if they're that desperate, they're going to come because they've got no other options. Ocasio-Cortez criticized her, saying, you can't whip up all and destabilize that whole region for decades and then not expect them to try to find a better place. So that was one thing she said. And then the other, in response to really dumb questions about, well, why aren't you stopping at the border? And I don't think there's anything to her stopping at the border. Politicians have been doing photo ops down there since forever, and nothing ever comes of it. But she said, well, I haven't gone to Europe either. Maybe not the type of snide remark you want to make with an issue that's so severe like this. And of course, the right-wingers have thrown her on that. So basically, she's being attacked from left and right. And those are the two things that grab the headlines over whatever substance she might have accomplished down there. People are saying this is going to haunt her when she runs for president, all that. I don't know about that. If they can come up with some type of success in Central America and at the border, people aren't going to remember her snide remarks. But at least for this particular news cycle, it was not advised. I think her advisors really need to talk to her about staying on script or writing a better script.
I think that that there was some controversy there, and like you said, the party politics of it aside, it was a trip whose purpose was to signal that the U.S. will begin to pay more attention to the root cause of the migration problems originating in the Northern Triangle. Conventional wisdom, border politics is that this problem is primarily an economic one, that people come here for the opportunity, that people are primarily coming here for the opportunity to work in the United States. This situation, Northern Triangle, complex history and set of causes. But many experts consider that it's a combination of poverty, violence, and corruption, creating those conditions on the ground, making fear and hopelessness the most significant causes. So just to be clear, these three countries, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, the region has some of the highest rates of poverty and homicide in the Western Hemisphere. And transnational narco trafficking networks are very influential and damaging to their civil society. So this administration is claiming the success was that they were able to sign an anti-corruption task force agreement to help address this lack of opportunity. So that's kind of the backstory that people are aware of it, but our country's history, like AOC was alluding to, we're deeply ingrained and entwined in both the choices of leadership there, the sort of pampering, I guess is the right word to say it, to what we could call aristocrats or oligarchs there. With 60% of the country living in poverty, this thing doesn't happen in a vacuum. And on top of that, the United States deported so many of our criminal gang folks, people down back to their home countries. These people go down there, they network, and then we encourage them to crack down on their crime, and then they fill their jails up. So the American traffickers mix with the local traffickers, and the gangs over the decades get even more robust. So there is a tangled history between the region and our country, and there's an obligation to a certain extent that we do address the root causes despite what some people, the political hot button nature of border politics.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to 1940s. I'm forgetting the name of the senator, but when Somoza was just brutally, ruling over people, he was anti-communist or whatever, and so they said that he may be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. We've propped up regimes there, in murderous regimes in Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala, using Honduras as a base, a military base, to support the Contras, who had been mostly made up of former Somocistas, and the rest. By some miracle, other countries have managed to stay out of it. Costa Rica and Belize, and of course Panama, although they got dragged into it in a different way. But it's a decades-long history of us being in there, of Reagan calling it our backyard, and wanting the sphere of influence. And the Civil Wars just ravaged those countries with massacres, in the hillsides, and psychopaths like Rios Montt, winning favor in the United States because he called himself a born-again Christian, and saying that, we need to rid these villages of the devil, and sometimes that means we have to, it just was ongoing. This is the history of it. And then you have climate change, meaning that Central America is being hit with hurricanes more heavily. And it's just, and people are just leaving because they have no other option. They have no other hope. Mexico will only take so many of them, so they come up to the United States. And that is the root causes, and it's not going to be done with any a few tweaks here and there and some money thrown here and there. There's got to be kind of I think a massive type of program down there. Along the lines of what was done in Europe after World War II on scale, and to redo infrastructure. But again, some of these people were never removed from power, and people who and even Sandinistas, the ones who stayed in power, are not quite what they were, even if you believe they were communists before. Daniel Ortega. He's certainly not a communist these days, but he's also not a bright light of democratic values or even anti-corruption values. So what's going to happen? And that's a lot to throw onto a vice president with an unfunded mandate. I mean, it's going to require some money being spent in Congress. You can make the argument that it would benefit the United States economy, not just in terms of immigration, but in terms of strengthening the economy all the way down, to the bottom of the continent. But I don't think there's will to do that. So what are they going to do about the tens of thousands of people? Who knows?
I don't think I've made mistakes. I mean, every time somebody says I made a mistake, they do the polls and my numbers go up. So I guess I haven't made any mistakes.
We showed up and we demonstrated that we would not have our voices silenced by a Republican Party that across the country had a singular intention on suppressing the right to vote.
Some Democratic senators seem to imagine they could just break the rules on a razor-thin majority. Nothing would stand between them and their entire agenda, a new era of fast-track policymaking.
The Republican Party moved very far away from reality. And the fact that you got colleagues of mine in the Senate who refuse even today to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost the election. How do you deal with that?
Joe Biden is the president we need right now. Battle-tested, forward-looking, honest and authentic. He has never forgotten who he is fighting for.
Okay, Dave, I'm going to let you introduce this one. A report came in about billionaires and taxes. You want to elaborate?
Yeah, sure. So ProPublica, within the last 24 or 48 hours or something, released a vast trove of IRS data on the tax returns of thousands of the nation's wealthiest people, covering more than 15 years. And there's they've just begun to kind of give some, reveal some of the overarching themes, and over the coming weeks, months, and potentially years, they're going to release some of these, data points and explanations of how this all really works in our country. But the takeaway, the top line takeaway headline, over the lifespan, over an average American's lifespan, we're going to pay about 17.6% income tax. Which is 5 times more than the top 25 wealthiest billionaires, who over their lifetime or expected, or over the data that they've been able to review, we're paying about 3.4%. So the key big picture issue is that your labor component, your salary and your wages, make up the vast majority of the average person's income, while it makes up a much smaller component of the wealthiest people, who typically earn much more of that income through capital income and capital gains. So another element of this, which is just like the rules, how the rules are written, where you stand depends on where you sit. And a lot of the lobbying that's done in DC is find ways to delay or eliminate tax liability. So taxes on capital gains are only due when your gain is realized. So they, like I said, they can be deferred or avoided entirely if they're passed along as inheritance. So the structure of how people set up their estates and their trust, their family, business, their family company, that is essentially a tax avoidance scheme, as well as if you look at Transparency International, they recognize that corporations are established for tax avoidance ultimately. So data came out very recently that we're talking large multinational corporations here too. But if you look at the debt to GDP of countries, there are countries that stand out with massive amounts of debt entirely because, like Ireland, Hong Kong, I think Singapore, there might be one other one that's equally obvious, but these countries have massive debts on their books, like triple the size of their economy, because companies are able to go there, put debt on the books, which allows them to show a loss, which allows them to owe no taxes anyplace. So that's the company side. But this report was more about people. And so One thing to say is too, like when people who earn income are spending money, they're spending the money they earned through their wages and salary. Whereas people who are have trusts and vast amounts of stored capital wealth, they use that wealth as collateral for other spending, other investments, other projects. They don't actually often touch their original money. They don't actualize the capital gain. They don't pay taxes. And if it gets inherited, then it's zero. So like I said earlier, in the coming months, ProPublica says they're going to use this data to explore in more detail how the ultra wealthy avoid taxes, exploit loopholes, and escape scrutiny from federal auditors.
Of course, we've known this, but now there's data to really draw a roadmap. If the Republican Party was of what it was in the 50s and 60s, there'd be a serious discussion about this. They might not want to do, massive restructuring of it such that, it's going to really cut into anybody's bottom line. But there would be a serious discussion of what we could do to recap some of that, and maybe even a discussion of a wealth tax, which is problematic, may not even be constitutional because the Constitution, I'm forgetting which amendment it is, but says that you can raise a tax, for certain purposes, and possibly not a wealth tax. It might be limited to income in terms of that. But there's ways that it can be done in terms of use fees for infrastructure. I mean, when you think about it, a lot of times the rich and the Koch brothers and the rest complain, oh, we pay more taxes than everybody else, but you'll benefit from taxes more than anybody else. In fact, you can argue that the whole concept of government is built around the protection of surplus wealth. I mean, it goes to the infrastructure. It even benefits, going to poor people. That's like a release valve to keep them from breaking into your home and cutting you up and eating you. I mean, that's somebody put out a meme there said, if we just eat one billionaire, the rest will fall in line. Just one, I mean, it's where we're at. We have it will probably be pushed by the Democrats to try to get this modest tax increases. I don't even want to call it tax increase. It's like partially restoring that horrible thing that Bush passed and that Obama, without a fight, extended. Was supposed to sunset. Because he didn't want to be perceived as raising taxes. And the problem is it's really hard to push this in American politics because, as Fitzgerald is often misquoted as saying, the reason we don't have socialism in this country is because every working person sees themselves as a temporarily frustrated millionaire. They'll say, well, they'll just pass the taxes on to us. Not how it works. Not good economics. A company can't always pass taxes on to people. But I'm hoping this will spark a discussion. But like I said, Republicans, no new taxes. That's their mantra all the time. They'll raise taxes occasionally, but they won't admit that that's what they're doing. And this last time, it ended up raising taxes on working people in a bunch of states by eliminating, for instance, the state income tax deduction or all of that. So it's anyway, it's class politics. I'm glad this is out there. It's not anything that none of us have known. We knew that throughout the recession that Obama had to deal with, that there were like $15 billion of private money just sitting basically in virtual pillowcases. They didn't invest it. A local libertarian attorney told me gleefully, yes, the rich people are on strike. It's Atlas Shrugged. They're not, putting their money out there. And I'm like, that just tells me that, maybe we should send the government in there to get it. I mean, because they acquired this wealth, through their benefits that they receive in society. They can start. They don't pay their share. Example: trucking industry. They are account for about 17% of the taxes that go to the revenue of repairing the highways. They cause something like 85% of the damage. That's a subsidy. And maybe there's good, sound economic reasons for doing it. That's, based as part of distribution could increase prices, but let's consciously acknowledge that that's a subsidy. We are subsidizing the truck industry, and let's be conscious about it. So anyway, like I said, everything about government is really about the protection of accumulated wealth, the vast majority of which is in very few hands. That's my Marxist statement for the day. I haven't been a Marxist in a while, but every once in a while I return to a kind of vulgar Marxist analysis.
I would say, I consider myself, I try to be a pragmatist on this issue and not get emotional about it, and just let the facts speak for themselves. And so there's one analyst, I believe it was at Transparency International, who said, if you look at the amount of debt in the continent of Africa, it closely parallels the amount of money that has left the continent into offshore tax havens. And there are all kinds of studies out there. It's a different topic for a different day, but that happens in our country too. These folks are offshoring their money to avoid taxes. But people have said, especially in response to this report, that what's shocking isn't what's illegal or subversive. What's shocking is what's legal. So you've got probably an amazingly upstanding set of folks: Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, Michael Bloomberg, Elon Musk. I mean, I'm not going to judge. Perfectly, they contribute immensely to the economy and the world. Sure, all of them do, definitely, right? But Warren Buffett's true tax rate on his wealth growth is 0.1%. So he's the guy who's, according to this report. So then they have a methodology. You can go look it up yourself. I'm not making this up. So their methodology is basically like how much his wealth has grown and versus how much he's paid in taxes. But Jeff Bezos, 0.98%. Michael Bloomberg, 1.3%. Elon Musk, a hero of this crew, 3.27%. Now, the amounts that they're paying is basically their obligation based on their reported income. So you've got wealth that has grown, and I'll just be real quick here: 24.3 billion for Buffett, 99 billion for Bezos, 22.5 billion for Bloomberg, 13.9 billion for Musk. That's the amount their wealth has grown over a short window of this analysis. And their tax rates are that tiny little percent. So maybe this is hopefully going to be supportive of a broader conversation about appropriate amounts of contribution to the nation's well-being.
Quick note in defense of Warren Buffett: he did at one point a few years ago say, "Tax me. I'm not being taxed enough," and now we know. So, all right, that brings us to the last topic of the evening. Okay, a report came in from the Watchdog Group about January 6th, reporting complete failures of communication of intelligence with the various police authorities. Not really commenting on whether any of it was politically motivated, and we could talk about that. But there were threats to do what happened all over the internet. Supposedly, some communication was sent. It didn't get to the people at the top. We've heard these stories about what was emailed and the rest. Definitely not a sense of urgency with regard to chatter all over the internet, dark web, and elsewhere, that this was going to happen, and then it happened. No real discussion of whether or not the relatively light security in comparison to the demonstrations, the anti-racist demonstrations of last summer, was in deference to Donald Trump. They don't want to be out there with heavy equipment because it might ruffle his feathers. No discussion of that. Republicans are saying, okay, we got the information. We don't need any more investigation. Democrats are using this as a basis to argue that we need a nonpartisan commission, and saying, and if we don't have a nonpartisan commission, we're just going to do the investigation on our own. And once again, the politics are around it. Republicans saying, let's move on. It wasn't that big a deal. Only a few hundred people did it, and blah, blah, blah. And they're being charged and entering pleas. Democrats are saying they want to know why this happened. They wanted to know if there was a political basis for it. And I think, even though they're not saying it, they want to know if there were any Congress people who were like giving tours and connected. They want to know whether or not Trump took any action whatsoever. It appears he didn't, but they want to know that. And of course, that's all seen as partisan. And of course, the Democrats certainly have partisan motivations for it, but for good reason. This thing happened. Trump was giddy about it, and his whole family was giddy about the crowd that was out there. Were they giddy because there's going to be a demonstration that would go to the Capitol and say, hey, hey, ho ho, something that would rhyme with, don't vote for the, pass the election, and that is definitely not what they had in mind. They had in mind that this was going to have an impact, and I think the Republicans, as I said a couple of weeks ago, are making an error by not having it be an impartial commission, because if it just goes straight to a partisan House committee analysis, the Democrats can subpoena whoever they want. And so anyway, Dave?
Yeah, so I was going to save this for the end, but I think it's relevant here. There's a Sherlock Holmes moment in one of his books where he's obviously a fictional character, but Sir Arthur Conan Doyle book, where they realized that the murderer lived in the house because the dog never barked. And after September 11th, not to bring this up again, but when they were asking the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, why is it that the U.S. government is not blaming Saudi Arabia for September 11th, even though most of the people were Saudis? His answer was, "You tell me this. Why didn't the dog bark? Mm-hmm. Why isn't the government blaming us?" And I thought that was one of those things that maybe the commission, the 9/11 Commission, would be able to wrap their head around. But instead, the 9/11 Commission had served slightly different purpose. I wasn't looking for why the dog didn't bark. I was looking for another sort of explanation and documenting for posterity what happened. I think that the Senate made an error, like you said. They could have had a nonpartisan commission present this frame it in a way that it's an inconvenient day of infamy, as opposed to what may end up happening with the subpoena power of the House of Representatives, to actually start looking in detail at the record. The public record is out there. Social media accounts, travel records, hotel rooms that were rented, parties that were held, chants that are on video. There are a lot of people that will be potentially implicated here. The big issue here is that there are still and thankfully calls for this to get independently and fully investigated. The president is saying that, so if this investigation is going to be coordinated through the White House, through the House of Representatives, like we anticipate, it's because they have this subpoena power. And so the president doesn't have to appoint a presidential commission. The House, leadership could decide to just run this through the Homeland Security Committee. They could appoint a select committee of various principals, or they could just continue at the current path where each relevant committee is doing the investigations that are respective to their own portfolio. So this is, like you said, this is going to go down that road, I think, where it's going to be pretty significant, I would say really significant, in highlighting the culpability as we enter the 22 cycle.
Right, and the Republicans, the state, have actually been saying to each other, yeah, we don't want this to run into that, but it's going to anyway. So they might as well have had some control over the process, but Trump didn't want it. That's their problem. This is why Mitch McConnell is probably privately very angry. First of all, he lost the Senate because of Trump, but this situation, and now it's going to be in there, and the Democrats will be controlling the narrative. I mean, Jim Jordan can only interrupt people for so long, before stuff gets out, and so I think it was a miscalculation on their part, because it's going to go into the next election cycle.
Yep.
Yeah.
The one last thing I would say here, since we just have a couple minutes to wrap up, is that there were some Senate Republicans who did vote for the commission. So Senators Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, Ben Sasse of Nebraska, Rob Portman of Ohio, Mitt Romney of Utah, and Pat Toomey said, well, if he could have made it, he would have voted too. So
right, the 7 who voted for impeachment. Okay, predictions. Dave, what do you got?
Well, so I'm going to mention again about the lab leak in Wuhan, the theory, and I have to clarify. Last week I called Dr. Gottlieb, the former head of the CDC. He's actually the former head of the FDA. So I'm going to correct that. But as more and more traction comes out about the matching of some of the evidence towards the idea that it was not this organic, bat cave mixing in with the food market strategy. So I think as it proceeds, that it looks like there was a degree of cover-up, that it was just an inconvenient thing to talk about, that this was one of the possibilities. I think people are going to, it hurts our institutional trust, but I think people are going to want to know, why is it exactly that there was a colluded effort by Facebook and others to silence people from questioning, exploring this more fully, and it might damper. My prediction is that this will pull back some of the robust talk about silencing people whose ideas we disagree with. That's currently popular.
A lot of attacks on Dr. Fauci now, although I read his emails. He sounds like a scientist, open to, different whatever points of view. The consensus still is that it probably wasn't a lab, but there is a lot of interesting evidence, at least in science, and we'll see what comes of it. But it doesn't look like China's going to allow any real investigation. So anyway, it brings me to my prediction. Going back to the infrastructure bill, I am predicting that there will not be a bipartisan passage of it. The reason being is a letter was sent today from 4 progressive House members, including Ocasio-Cortez, 3 names I didn't recognize. But the 4 is the magic number, because if they lose 4 Democrats, they don't have the majority on the vote. I think that it was deliberate that way. And they're saying if there isn't a lot of material in this bill to address climate change, we're not going to vote for it. And basically Republicans aren't going to want anything for climate change in there. I think effectively that kills any hope for a bipartisan bill. So it's going to have to be part of a reconciliation bill. And maybe that's good in some ways. Might not be good for Biden's aspirations of being, the president that rises above it all. But this thing needs to get passed, and it needs to be. So that is my prediction for the night. So, any quick remarks?
Well, I would say that this is, I fully agree that exercising power right there, Eric Holder, former Attorney General Eric Holder, came on TV over the last few days saying things like, Democrats are afraid to use their power. Democrats aren't ambitious enough, and they're not playing on a level playing field with the Republicans and their scorched earth approach to governing. I thought the last part was my words, but I think that now the writing is on the wall about how they ought to proceed, and I'm in full agreement with you.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the show. I want to thank you for watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. And Dave, Frank, and I will be back next week. I'm sure there's going to be plenty to discuss, because there are some stories really heating up. And until next time, keep thinking.